Entergy is proud to support programming on LPB and greener practices that preserve Louisiana.
The goal of our environmental and sustainability initiatives really is to ensure that our kids and future generations can be left with a cleaner planet.
Additional support provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation and the Ziegler Art Museum located in Jennings City Hall. The museum focuses on emerging Louisiana artists and is an historical and cultural center for Southwest Louisiana. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting, with support from viewers like you.
Amy Coney Barrett is a star.
LSU law professor emeritus Dr. John Baker on President Trump's choice for Supreme Court justice.
They really wanted to get rid of his powers.
Your tax dollars in this special session of the legislature.
I've got an incredible team of mom volunteers.
The amazing outreach helping hurricane victims in Cameron Parish.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natasha Williams.
And I'm Andre Morrow. Much more on those top stories in a moment on this week's edition of SWI.
But first, let's update the state's coronavirus numbers. 696 new cases and 21 more people losing their battle with the disease. Here's Governor John Bel Edwards.
Whether you call it the third surge or the second wave, it's happening around the United States of America. More than 70,000 cases reported yesterday. That's the first time in 3 months we've reached that level. In short, the Phase 3 order remains in effect. I want you to know, and this should surprise no one, I take my responsibility to the people of Louisiana very seriously, especially during this global pandemic. I have at all times relied upon accurate data that has been fully transparent to everyone who cared to look at it, and followed the recommendations of the White House Coronavirus Task Force that were available to anyone who cared to look at it.
Thanks, Governor. And now we'll look at other headlines making news across the state. Formosa Plastics is blaming the coronavirus pandemic for a decision to delay some work on a more than $9 billion construction project in St. James Parish. A company statement says the building won't begin until the pandemic has subsided or there's an effective, widely available vaccine. A possible case of illegal hazing has led LSU to suspend activities at Phi Kappa Psi fraternity. An investigation is underway after a student was taken to a hospital for treatment. EBR District Attorney Hiller Moore says the case is unbelievably similar to the one at Phi Delta Theta involving Max Groover 3 years ago. Groover was an LSU freshman who died after a night of coerced drinking. The one student found guilty in the case is currently serving time. LSU received $6 million to expand a scholarship program for engineering students working their way through school. The gift from the late Bill Brookshire's family means the program he founded can help more than 300 students a year for the next 3 years. Attorney General Jeff Landry says the state arrested 5 people accused of stealing unemployment benefits. 3 of the 5 are accused of using someone else's name and personal information to file on their behalf. Landry says the fraudsters have stolen more than $300,000. The benefits are meant for people forced out of work because of the coronavirus pandemic. As if things weren't bad enough, today we learned something that could haunt Louisiana for the next decade. Census takers say they couldn't get all the households necessary for a fair and accurate count.
So what does that mean? An undercount? Schools could be overcrowded and new hospitals could be put on hold, and road repairs delayed because the state wouldn't get its fair share of federal money.
The governor Thursday issued a proclamation honoring former Senator John Breaux. This comes as the CPRA, the Restoration Authority of the Coast, celebrates 30 years.
30 years ago in 1990, Breaux knew the state and its coast were in big trouble, so he scrambled to find money that could begin to help a restoration and rebuilding project.
His name became synonymous with the work and was known as the Breaux Act.
It makes me so incredibly proud to see all of you here talking about something that is so important to myself over the years of my service in the Congress, and it's so important to this country and particularly so important to our state of Louisiana. Every day a little bit of Louisiana was breaking off, and going into the Gulf of Mexico. And it was never coming back. And unlike a hurricane, as tragically as they are, or a tornado, or an earthquake in some parts of the country, after those events you can rebuild. And we're seeing that now in Louisiana. You can rebuild your business, you can rebuild your house. But if a little bit of your state breaks off and disappears, that's forever. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission, for taking a concept that we had 30 years ago, and now on a regular basis, a daily basis, every day, something's happening out in that coastal area so that we won't be losing a football field every hour. And as the governor said, Mr. Chairman, we're actually now rebuilding more than we're losing. That is an enormous, enormous accomplishment.
Many government watchdog groups look at the special session of the legislature that just ended and question whether it was really necessary. We know many lawmakers had an axe to grind because they didn't like all the powers the governor has been using for safety decisions during the pandemic. I talked with Barry Erwin, president of Council for a Better Louisiana. Barry, what was the purpose of this session?
Well, ostensibly, I'd say there were three things that lawmakers were wanting to try and accomplish. One was to deal with a problem in the state's Unemployment Compensation Trust Fund, which basically is the fund that pays out unemployment benefits. And as you can imagine, with what we've been going through, that fund is now depleted. So there were some problems surrounding that. The other thing was with Hurricane Laura and the difficulties that caused in southwest Louisiana. They wanted to see what things they could do to try and shore up, financial resources, but take care of some technical issues that needed to be taken care of there too. But really the thing that was drawing them here is that a lot of legislators, particularly in the House, have been really upset about the governor's emergency orders in terms of, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 reopening. They weren't satisfied with it, and they really wanted to do something to try and curtail the governor's powers to be able to either continue this or to do it again in the future. And that's really what dominated the conversation.
And it seems they got some of that done.
Well, they did. I think it's a matter of degree. If you started, for instance, with the governor's emergency plans, what legislators, again, particularly in the House, wanted to do, they really wanted to get rid of his powers, to really extract a lot of the authority that he has away from him. And they passed resolution after resolution, bill after bill, sent them over to the Senate, all kinds of variations on how to do that. But the senators were a little bit more wary about that. I mean, they have a different view. They had some constitutional concerns about it, and they sat on those for a long time. But at the end of the day, as legislators are wont to do, they came up with a compromise of sorts. I can't tell you that it changes the balance in any huge way, but it gave legislators a little something to check the box off on, that they gave themselves a seat at the table, that they have more say when the governor is going to be issuing these kinds of orders. And, it doesn't do a whole lot to the governor's authority. But then the bottom line at the end of the day is the governor could veto this if he wants to, and it could be all for naught.
All right. What money does the state have to help with hurricane aftermath?
Not really a lot. I mean, you can direct some things. Part of what they wanted to do was to try and make sure that some of the school districts, particularly, Calcasieu and Cameron around in that area, that have really been disrupted by that storm, and of course Delta that came later, that they could remain whole in their funding while they really don't have kids going to school there. It's kind of a technical thing with the formula of how things are distributed. They passed some things to do that, really kind of along the margins. But Bessie also passed a change in the MFP, which will allow the legislature a lot of flexibility to take care of it. So you could say they did some things, but it wasn't a huge amount.
And that unemployment trust fund, there was money in it. There's not now, but it still has to be paid?
Yeah, eventually. I mean, we're in a mode right now where it's totally depleted. So we are borrowing money automatically from the federal government so we could repay those claims. So two things really had to happen. One is that the way our law works is when the money is depleted, we automatically have a tax that kicks in on business. That's how the fund is funded, is businesses pay into this fund. So when people get unemployed, that's where the money comes from. But nobody wanted that tax to kick up the way that it would have under the circumstances we're in with the pandemic and businesses closed. So they took care of that. They basically postponed that. The other thing the law would have done was reduce the benefit to workers, and nobody wanted to do that either. So those things are taken care of. The problem is not solved. It's really just postponed.
It's like they just punted it for now,
did.
right?
They absolutely did.
Oh, in a year of just cataclysmic issues, problems, one after another, there were these pet projects that got snuck in. And that surprised everybody, I thought.
It really was. The bill that was passed is just a normal bill. It's called a supplemental appropriation. No big deal. Went through the whole committee process. But when it got to the final step, that's between the House and the Senate where they work out their compromises, it came out with $24 million, whatever it was, of pet projects that nobody had seen before. And they were very local projects. They were in districts of a lot of influential legislators, and especially a lot of the new legislators just kind of blew up. It's like, where did this come from? We've got COVID issues, we've got, unemployment issues, we've got all of this. Where did this come from? They tweaked it a little bit, but it still passed.
Some of it smacks of old Louisiana politics. So overall, tax dollars, briefly, well spent?
It's hard to say. I mean, obviously, we all felt like there was probably a need for a special session in the fall at one point, but that was when we thought that the feds were going to be sending money, to the state, and then in that case, we would have to have a session so we could spend that money. Well, that hadn't happened yet.
Sure.
We could have done all of that during that session, so we had an extra one. Honestly, it was so a lot of legislators could blow off steam about, the COVID restrictions and the governor's powers, and they did that, and so I don't know if that's worth the money or not.
They did that, but will it amount to anything? We'll have to wait and see.
It's unlikely, but we'll see.
Barry, thanks so much. It's great to talk to you.
Same here.
Because of the threat of a veto, the game of politics kept playing into this morning when House Republicans got 53 signatures on a petition that would at least temporarily strip the governor of some of his powers. Late today, Governor Edwards held a news conference, and here's what he said.
I will tell you that it's reckless and irresponsible and unconscionable. And I believe that the only way they could have gotten 53 or more signatures is for that petition to contain the signature of a number of folks who've expressed to me privately, but also have said publicly that they believe the petition to be a bad idea and that it's unconstitutional.
The Senate Judiciary Committee voted Thursday to advance the nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, setting up for a final vote for confirmation on Monday. This just days after Senate Republicans plowed ahead with several days of hearings on a mission to replace the Supreme Court seat once held by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We spoke with LSU Professor Emeritus Dr. John Baker, who knows Judge Barrett and her Louisiana family very well.
Dr. John Baker has known Amy Coney Barrett all of her life. He and her father started their families and began their careers as law clerks in New Orleans around the same time. It's no surprise he is definitely a fan of her many accomplishments.
How does one work their way from Metairie, Louisiana, to being the top of the list to be the next Supreme Court member?
Well, a lot of it's luck, but in her case, it was more than luck because typically the nominees are law graduates of Harvard or Yale, or in the case of Justices Rehnquist and O'Connor, Stanford. I had expected to have her in my class in 1994. My criminal law roster that year, I looked and there was Miss Amy Coney, but she didn't show up on the first day. And I later learned that she was at Notre Dame Law School. The best decision she ever made, because without that, she would not have been on the track to go to the feeder judge, Judge Lawrence Silberman, who then was able to push her into Justice Scalia's chambers. It would be a number of years later before LSU got their first two law clerks on the Supreme Court.
He says there is jockeying for positioning for judicial appointments, but he's convinced Barrett never took that route.
In Judge Barrett's position, though, I don't think she ever really thought about being on the Supreme Court prior to the time she was nominated for the Seventh Circuit. As soon as she was nominated, her name was quite a buzz for many people. So just for instance, I mean, anybody who met her knew she and I used to lecture back to back for 6 years in a program for law students. And I would usually go first, and after I would speak, a number of students would come up and talk to me. But after she spoke, she was mobbed.
Her nomination to the Supreme Court, though, is the center of great controversy. Her ultra-conservative views leading to rallies in Washington this past weekend, Women's March protesters flooding the streets of D.C. on Saturday to demonstrate against the Trump administration's decision to appoint Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court.
As she made very clear, and she didn't play any games, she told people her judicial philosophy. And it's if you're an originalist, which she clearly is, you're going to follow the text. And I would say the overwhelming number of law professors in the country are what we call living constitutionalists, who don't basically believe that you're bound by the text. So originalists are a minority in terms of law faculty, although the American people overwhelmingly want judges to say what the law is, not to invent it. So she will definitely tip the court, and not only tip it, she will be a leader.
And he says although in the recent Supreme Court nomination hearing she was criticized for how she answered some of the questions, he says she did exactly what she was supposed to do.
She followed the so-called Ginsburg rule, but it was a rule before Ginsburg. A judge is not supposed to indicate how he or she would decide a future case. They're not supposed to do that. In fact, in times when I've been involved with judges and I'm with students or lawyers, and they'll ask a question instinctively, I know when the judge shouldn't answer the question. And not that long ago, when a judge was asked a question and I was on the same panel, I said, Judge, you can't answer that question. So people who pay attention to how courts actually decide cases know this.
At 48, she would be the youngest, and she could possibly serve for decades
Yes.
in her role. How important is that?
Oh, it's very important. You know, both administrations, Republican and Democrat, for the last number of years, it was after Nixon's presidency, because he appointed Lewis Powell, who was not young, let's put it that way. But since then, they've tried to get justices who will be on the court for a long time. And so we've had long-serving justices. Now, in a way, that's a kind of a return to the early part when Chief Justice Marceaux and Justice Story served for many, many, many years.
As a member of the High Court, Barrett could reconsider landmark rulings on abortion, gay rights, corporate power, and the Affordable Care Act. She is President Trump's third Supreme Court nominee, and if approved, will fill the vacancy of the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was a liberal. A court with her on it will have a 6-3 conservative majority.
What I can tell you looking back is that her character obviously has been greatly shaped by her family and her faith. And her father and her mother are deeply devoted Christians who take their faith seriously. And not just faith, it's family and it's extended family. And they were always helping somebody. That's just part of who they are. And it's part of the Christian mission to love one another. And they have been great models of that.
Several local and national groups have come out against the nomination of Supreme Court nominee and Louisiana native Amy Coney Barrett, among them the ACLU of Louisiana. Its executive director, Alana Odoms, issued this statement.
Conducting a rushed and politically motivated nomination process in the middle of a pandemic threatens the legitimacy of the court and denies the American people the ability to provide meaningful input on the nominee. Every American should be troubled by the brazen partisan politics and hypocrisy of ramming through a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court on the eve of an election, when the Senate took the exact opposite position just 4 years ago. Out of respect for the American people, the legitimacy of the court, and the rule of law, we've urged the Senate to defer the confirmation process for Justice Ginsburg's successor until after inauguration.
Saturday, another wave of relief heads to Cameron Parish in the wake of Hurricanes Laura and Delta. This week, I talked with 3 Louisiana women who are playing integral roles in recovery efforts. Polly Glover helps spearhead volunteers with this event, which is called Cameron Kids Strong.
When I had a little boy look at me and tell me at Feed the Fleet that I was beautiful, and I saw the sadness in his eyes, I called that night to the port director and I said, that's the next one. We'll go take care of them.
Polly Glover has a heart that's bigger than the state she loves. She spent more than 30 years as an advocate to save our fragile coastline, a coastline even more fragile after back-to-back powerful hurricanes of the past 2 months. Glover shares coastal concerns with LSU disaster ecologist Dr. Linda Bowie and Cameron Parish Port Director Clair Marceaux. When Laura and Delta made landfalls in almost the same spot in the parish, 6 weeks apart, the 3 women all felt a strong sense to try and help all that had been broken. Following Laura, Glover's second trip to Cameron was for the Feed the Fleet event. It was there that her chance meeting with that little boy sparked the idea for Saturday's Cameron Kids Strong.
The goal or overall hope is that we will arrive in Cameron with 10 volunteers coming from Baton Rouge, my friends that have answered my call to come and help. We're going to deliver some joy to the kids of Cameron this time, focusing a little bit more on the kids who have lost so much in a rather turbulent year. I've got an incredible team of mom volunteers from here in Ascension. I've got some restaurants, and a restaurant in Baton Rouge who their chef has graciously donated his time. He's also afforded me the opportunity, and I'll tell you, and I'm happy to share it, I've got Chris Moto from Marceaux, and we're teaching him a little bit about the coast and why we need to care for it. We're hoping to have a kid-friendly meal, Andre, and hand out some books so the kids continue to have a little bit of education and a little bit of fun through this sadness.
It seems every trip Glover makes to the ravaged area, she comes back with another idea or theme to return. Her first visit following Laura gave rise to Feed the Fleet.
I left that night and got home and I called the port director and I said, hey, what about I take a pot of my own and a propane tank and a boiler and I go get 100 pounds of shrimp and I cook. I'm blessed through the coastal advocacy and environmental work to know a lot of shrimpers, okay? And a friend of mine said, I can't leave my boat, but if you will go cook, I will give you the shrimp. And then another friend of mine said, if you will go cook, I will give you the seasonings. And then Louisiana Oysters jumped on board and said, hey, I'll go with you and bring oysters. And the next thing you know, it's kind of a domino effect. Louisiana Coca-Cola Bottling donated. It was just kind of a community good, feel good. LSU Sea Grant jumped on board, and we were able to feed 250 shrimpers who were tired.
Marceaux is overwhelmed by the kindness of Glover's far-reaching helping hands, and for very personal reasons. She and her family live in Cameron and evacuated for Laura. When they returned, their house was gone. Only the slab foundation remained.
And it's that way for countless others. It's a really strange feeling to pull up in my driveway and for my husband and our kids to look at that space. That was our home where we felt safe. And I struggle, Andre, with folks who question why we would want to go home, because disaster is not limited to Cameron Parish or the coast of Louisiana. Believe me, I've heard it many times throughout my life and my career. Why do you live there? Right. Well, why do you live where you live? How about that? What is the draw for you? How about there's 7 generations of families who live on the same pieces of property 7 generations later?
Cameron's port, under Marceaux's leadership, is the region's economic driver and a global energy leader. Louisiana ranks 3rd in the world for the export of liquefied natural gas, but the only parish that exports LNG is Cameron. Bowie says that makes recovery from blows delivered by hurricanes increasingly difficult because the region is so vital.
The ecosystem has radically changed. So one of the ways I think about this is we've set up a board game, right? So the coast is like the board, and all the players, the humans are the pieces, and all the creatures and plants in the ecosystem are part of this board game. And we know the rules of that game. When the hurricane came, it didn't just jostle the board game. It knocked all the pieces off of the table, and it potentially changed the rules.
She says storm surge from Laura, followed by Delta, flattened sand dunes and battered wetlands.
If another storm came like Laura right now, with the way the coast looks, the inland areas that have a lot of our chemical companies, oil and gas, and places where people live, work, and play, that is extremely vulnerable. So I would say, yes, there needs to be some retreat, but we really need to focus on restoration and taking care of our coast.
It looks like the New Orleans Saints won't be relocating their games to Tiger Stadium after all. Earlier this week, the team and New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell announced an agreement to have a limited number of fans in the Mercedes-Benz Superdome over the remainder of the season. The change will take place in phases, with just 3,000 fans allowed for this Sunday's game against the Carolina Panthers.
This month's Louisiana Public Square looks at how the coronavirus is affecting football fans, players, coaches, and the economy. The show explores the changes at high school, college, and professional levels. Delay of game, football, and COVID-19 airs Wednesday, October 28th at 7 o'clock on LPB and in New Orleans on WLAE.
Everyone, that is our show for this week. Remember, you can watch anything LPB anytime, wherever you are, with our LPB app.
You can catch LPB news and public affairs shows as well as other programs you've come to enjoy over the years. And please like us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
For everyone here at Louisiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Andre Moreau.
And I'm Natasha Williams. Thanks for watching.
Until next time, that's the state we're in.
Entergy is proud to support programming on LPB and greener practices that preserve Louisiana.
The goal of our environmental and sustainability initiatives really is to ensure that our kids and future generations can be left with a cleaner planet.
Additional support provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation and the Ziegler Art Museum located in Jennings City Hall. The museum focuses on emerging Louisiana artists and is an historical and cultural center for Southwest Louisiana. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting, with support from viewers like you.